Hi guys. Now today we're going to concentrate on our main character or protagonist, Kasienka. So we're going to focus on her background, okay, so where she comes from, nationality and so on. Also her appearance. We're going to look at traits or characteristics. Remember the word attributes can be used there as well. Also her behavior and her attitude, and then the relationships that she forges or forms then throughout the book, and also then the opinions of others and whether we accept them or reject them. And then obviously enough, we have to focus on our own personal response to this particular character. What is our opinion of her? Okay, so first of all, just some general points in terms of background. Obviously, she's a Polish immigrant. She's estranged from her father. She lives with her mother. She thought she would be exotic in England, but when she arrives, of course, she is shunned, she is ignored and bullied. Her appearance then, she has quite an athletic build because she's quite sporty. Remember, of course, it develops in the novel that she has a keen interest in and she's good at swimming and, of course, running as well. She has very pale skin, sort of snow white skin. And as she says herself, no one likes too white, Polish winter white. So in effect, then she's ostracized or alienated or even bullied because of her skin color. She's aged 12 and she becomes 13, of course, by the end of the novel. So 12 to 13. She describes her hair, of course, as sticking up like moody fur. She has short black hair and she's actually bullied for that. The other girls accuse her as such of being a lesbian. So she decides to grow her hair and then use a hair straightener to kind of tame those very unruly locks of hers. Okay, moving on then to traits and characteristics. Now try to use specific adjectives, okay, very particular vocabulary when you are describing Kasienka. So I'm going to go through a list that I have here that I've compiled myself, and then you can jot them down and then decide whether you agree or disagree. Would you have other examples? Would you have other quotations perhaps that you would include then when you're actually describing this particular character? Okay, so remember that you will be rewarded for your personal opinion, but remember it must be an informed opinion. You have to find substance and evidence in the extract, of course, or obviously in the novel itself. Okay, so number one, I would say that a key trait is that she's intelligent. So she's very knowledgeable. She seems quite well educated as well. I mean, think about the very beginning of the novel. She has that reference to Ellis Island and Lady Liberty. Okay, so that would be a very obvious one. She references Jane Austen and she begins to suspect, of course, that the other students in her class have no idea who Jane Austen actually is. She knows, she's very aware, of course, that she has crooked English, as she said herself. Okay, so maybe she's not that great at reading at the moment because obviously she's reading a foreign language, but she is able to express herself. Okay, and she becomes more articulate and even eloquent then towards the end of the novel itself. She's very good at maths. Remember, she says that finishing the maths paper is as easy as finishing a plateful of raspberries. Okay, so she's super smart when it comes to maths. She yawns in class though, because remember that the teachers put her in the wrong class essentially at the very beginning. Then when she passed the exams, or of course with flying colours, she is put into a more suitable class for her. She's also skeptical about group work. I would kind of relate to that, to be honest with you, because I find when I give students work to do in groups that it's usually the more diligent students who tend to do most of the work, if not all of the work. So she's quite cynical about group work. She pretends to work, she prefers, we'd say, to work on her own. Okay, we can see her playing Scrabble and chess later on. She actually teaches Kenora how to play chess. So all of that reinforces the idea of an intelligent girl or a smart girl as such there. Okay, I'd also say that she's quite aware and observant. She seems to be quite mature for her age. So she's very ill at ease in year 7 then because she's surrounded by 11-year-olds and she finds them kind of annoying, irritating and very immature then. She knows that Conrad, one of the other boys, is a coward because he's quite brash and boastful, but essentially, of course, he is a bully. She says, if I flirted with him, he would probably be terrified. So he thinks it's okay, of course, to make inappropriate comments, especially about the girls. But she has his number. She kind of sizes him up pretty early on. She also knows, of course, that the story that her mother kind of creates about Tata is a sugary fiction, as she says herself. She actually realizes what's going on. So she's very perceptive as such, very, very sharp. So like I said, great awareness, and also later on we can emphasize that she has great self-awareness as well. So she knows that they're poor and she worries about finding Tata. She worries about her mother, of course, and her mother's mental health. Okay, so emphasizing then, of course, her relationship with Kenoro, she appreciates the fact that he is intelligent and that he's optimistic, because she sees herself as quite pessimistic as such then. And she knows, even before her mother does, that Kenoro is actually interested in Ala, her mother, and that the mother is actually interested in him, but she requires a little bit of persuasion there as such. Okay, I would also say that, number 3, perhaps, that she is resilient. You know, she's quite tough and quite stubborn and quite independent at times. And she puts up with quite a lot in terms of her family situation and also at school as well. So she copes alone at school, okay? And she doesn't tell her mother, of course, about the bullying. For example, when Claire then cuts chunks of her hair, which is assault when you think about it, she lies about that to her mother and pretends, of course, that chewing gum got stuck in it and the teacher had to cut her hair. She makes dinner for her mother when her mother is exhausted at the end of the day. She wants to console her mother, essentially. It's almost like sometimes she's the adult and the mother is the child. Going back to how perceptive she is, she says, Mama isn't a good listener. And it's kind of the idea, of course, that she's sort of frustrated, really, that she needs her mother to listen to her, and she needs her mother to see, of course, that she's actually maturing and she knows more than the mother actually assumes that she does. She says, for example, that she didn't cry when her father left. We see her later on, though, of course, sobbing when she wakes up, having dreamt about him. So it's the idea that she appears to be quite a tough cookie, but in essence, of course, and this relates back to my next point, she is actually quite vulnerable. I mean, after all, she's only 12 going on 13. So she's on the cusp of adolescence, on that kind of border as such. She's kind of insecure about her looks, and she's insecure about her abilities, and she's insecure about her identity as well. Okay, so at the very beginning of the novel, remember when she's at the airport, she says, I cling to the belt of her coat, her mother's coat, too old for holding hands. So she knows, of course, that she has to grow away from her mother and she has to be more independent, but she desperately needs the reassurance of her mother as well. And that would be quite typical of, we'd say, a young teenager then. So she wants to go home. Of course, she hates being alienated. She refers to herself as pessimistic as such. When William doesn't turn up, she feels rejected, and then breathes a sigh of relief when he explains, of course, that he was ill. So it's not an actual rejection. It was just one of those things, essentially. When it comes to her relationship with her father and her father's behaviour, she simply says, I do not know how to be happy. Okay, so it's the idea that she's dissatisfied with the way that he has behaved, and she wants to be able to express that, but not just to be angry about it, just to be truthful and honest as such. Okay, she's also bullied, remember, because of her background, because of her looks, and because simply she's different. So she says then very simply that she wasn't chosen for group work, and she calls herself, or refers to herself, describes herself as unwanted and misused, like old boots dragged from a river. Okay, so we've emphasized that she's intelligent, that she's very aware of her surroundings, aware of other people and what they're actually like, quite observant as such there. Okay, you can see that she's quite resilient. I mean, sometimes at school she just hides. Remember, she says she's hiding from the raised antlers, as if the other kids are almost like animals spoiling for a fight. Okay, but she is quite tough as well, and obviously that is very apparent at the very, very end of the book when she stands up to Claire and kind of asserts herself as very strong. But we also see the flip side, that she's quite vulnerable. So it's a good idea to have kind of contrasting characteristics or traits, and it's also a good idea to have, we'd say, both positive and negative traits when we're focusing on Kasienka. Okay, I've also said that she's quite serious and quite intense as such. Okay, for example, sometimes she'll say that she doesn't really want to behave like a child, that she doesn't think that it's very appropriate as such. She says, for example, I know it's childish, but I want to build a snowman. Okay, so it's kind of the idea of sometimes she just has to let herself go. She just has to live in the moment because a lot of the time she's very guarded, for example, where she has to behave in a very mature way because of her mother and the way that her mother, of course, can be unreliable sometimes. She reads about Sylvia Plath's Desire to Die, and she says simply, of course, that I'm living with a rock in my belly. And that kind of relates back, of course, to the anxiety that she feels and the kind of pessimism that she experiences as well. When she gets into the pool, she says, of course, that she never plays or paddles in the pool. She says simply, I'm here to work hard. So she's very focused and very single-minded, essentially. Very hardworking, as we've said before. Remember, the word diligent can be used instead of hardworking. Like I said then, she plays chess with Kenora. And think about it, he's a grown man and she's kind of forged this particular friendship with him. And she says, of course, we are competitive, but we are generous. I mean, that's a very mature thing to say. It doesn't really sound like something a child would say, a 12-year-old would say as such then. When she's angry with Tata, then she describes, my stomach is a stone that I wish I could throw at Tata. So very eloquent in the way that she expresses, of course, her anger as such. But remember that she does try to keep a lid on those emotions for most of the novel. Okay, I'd also say number 6 then that she has a conscience. She is a girl who has integrity as such. She knows very clearly the difference between right and wrong. For example, she wants to buy makeup for Ola, her mother. She doesn't. She keeps the £5 for herself, the £5 that her grandmother gave her, and then she feels guilty because she thinks, of course, that her mother is doing so much for her that she should actually be more generous. She feels guilty, for example, about being jealous of William's swimming medal as well. So it's kind of the idea where she has these kind of natural emotions, but she expects better from herself. Okay, number 7, she's also a very practical or resourceful person. For example, Kenora recognises that within her, and then he trusts her then with her father's new address. And he tells her to go alone. Now think about it, you have sort of a 12-year-old girl, almost 13, and he's encouraging her to go and visit her father on her own because he knows, of course, that Ola is not strong enough to do that, and perhaps that fireworks would ensue. So he trusts her. It's almost like she is an adult in that particular situation. She says, for example, there's no space in my belly for butterflies. It's kind of the idea where she knows that she has to be sort of very sensible, very practical and prudent as such. She tells her mother, for example, that she's wasting money on Tata's posters. Okay, so once more, it's almost like she has assumed the role of the parent here, and her mother then becomes the daughter. She's not that disappointed by Christmas, even though they have very little. She says, of course, it was good enough. Okay, so once more, very pragmatic and very sensible and very practical, kind of uncomplaining. Think about it, most kids, most 12-year-olds would complain, of course, if they didn't get exactly what they wanted for Christmas. Okay, number 8, I would say that she's quite sensitive and kind. Okay, for example, then she makes friends with the new girl, the Muslim girl, Delilah. She's also kind to William when William confides in her then about the fact that his mother is dead. And she feels then that she can share her secrets as such then too. She doesn't express her doubts about finding Tata, essentially. She keeps those to herself because she knows that that would upset her mother. And she says very simply, hope is all Mama has, and I cannot take it from her. She couldn't bear to sort of disappoint her or hurt her in any way. Number 9, I think we could say that she does suffer from low self-esteem. Remember, that really relates back to the fact that she's just different, or that she looks different, or that she comes from a different place, essentially here. I mean, she even says about William, I'm too difficult for him. It's kind of the idea where she almost feels like she has to apologise for being a complex human being rather than just being simple and straightforward. And we do see, of course, that she grows in confidence then throughout the novel as a result of various experiences. She even says to her mother, though, I know I am useless. She refers to herself as the out-of-date daughter. And that's, of course, how insecure she feels because then her father has a new relationship and a new daughter, and she feels like she's being sort of marginalized essentially when it comes to that. Okay, so that would be number 9 then, the kind of low self-esteem that she suffers from. But then, as we see, of course, she matures and she evolves then throughout the novel. Okay, number 10 would be sort of a negative trait. Maybe sometimes she can be mean-spirited, or you could say this is kind of typical enough maybe of girls or boys her age, in that she admits that she ignored a new girl in her old school. The girl was Alexandra. But if you kind of think about it, she makes a point of saying that she never physically assaulted her, she never called her names, she just gave her the cold shoulder, the silent treatment, essentially then. So that could be kind of a negative trait that you could associate with her, or you could just explain it away, of course, and say that she was young and she was immature and she was trying to conform. Okay, you could say she's a little bit naive, but then again, she's only 12 going on 13. For example, when she's shaving her legs, of course, she forgets to use shaving cream or shaving foam, and then she slices her leg to ribbons, essentially. I think also the fact that she's trying to understand the bullies for too long. You just want to give her a bit of a shake and kind of say to her, look, these are bullies. Don't try to understand them, essentially. Just deal with them. Deal with them in your own way. And of course, she does confront Claire towards the end of the novel, but it takes her a while, I think, to get that confidence to do it. So I think sometimes she can be a little bit too innocent, a little bit too naive. So I think really this book is about her identity and how she finds herself by the end of the novel, and she becomes much more confident. And essentially then she's emphasizing at the end, there are many Kasienkas now. She has split herself into pieces and scattered herself about like fallen fruit beneath a leafless tree. So she lists all the kind of different aspects of her personality, almost like different personas, different roles that she would play. So she refers to Mama's girl, okay, she's kind of childish as such. Tata's pilgrim then, okay, the idea of course that she's sort of like a moody teenager. William's Cassie, like the swimmer, the confident swimmer, but also the girlfriend as such. Then Claire's victim, describing herself as dumb and defiant as such then. And she says, when I am alone, I am nothing. So it's almost like she's playing out different roles then when she's outside with other people. And the whole point of the novel is that she's trying to determine for herself who she is inside and then be more confident in who she is. So she says very simply, if only I knew Kasienka's Kasienka, i.e. if only I knew who I was, if only I knew myself. When I search for myself in the bathroom mirror, I cannot find her at all. That's actually a reference to one of Sylvia Plath's poems, Mirror. Sort of the idea, of course, is you're confronting yourself and asking yourself, who am I and what do I want from life? What's important to me? Rather than just allowing other people to tell you who you are and what you should or ought to be doing as such. And remember that she feels safe in the water. It's like another world. It's alien, but she's in command of that particular world. Okay, so towards the end then she grows in confidence. She likes that William tells her to stand up for herself, and he more or less allows her then, of course, to rescue herself. So he's not the kind of Prince Charming just rushing in at the end, of course, and telling her that everything's going to be fine and then they live happily ever after. It's not like that. It's more realistic as such. And she literally says, he knows I can save myself. That makes me glow and I love him even more. So it's the idea that he sees her as strong and then she trusts her own strength as such. So at the very end then, of course, she becomes more competitive at swimming. She wants to beat the others because she knows that she's good enough. And she says, I dive with a fierceness I don't expect. So she's not timid or shy or quiet anymore. She asserts herself. So therefore very confident and assertive. So there is a realization then at the very end of the novel where she says, I cannot make Mama whole again. I can't make her perfect, or I can't repair her. I can't restore her to what she once was. She has to do that for herself. And then obviously she finds real friendship in Delilah. They're able to, of course, confide in each other and tell each other secrets. And she finds love with William then as well. So she refers then, of course, to the daily baptism of the swimming practice or training. So it's kind of the idea, of course, that she is being reborn then by the end of the novel. That it's kind of a new and improved version of Kasienka. So she says simply, water is another world. I have to trust myself. The safe silence of submergence. And then at the very end, of course, she tells Claire to piss off, which I think is very, very important. It's very important that she's able just to stand up and say what she is thinking, and also emphasize to Claire, of course, that she doesn't care what Claire thinks, because after all, Claire's opinion is completely irrelevant. It's about what Kasienka, of course, thinks of herself. It's about, we'd say, other people she cares about and how they regard her as such. So if you think about it, you should have, okay, about, we'd say, 7 or 8 different points. So when it comes to the exam, you probably won't have time, of course, to include everything if you're asked a question on character. So you need to kind of make it more manageable, whittle it down, we'd say, to about 4 or 5 points. Okay, make sure that you have examples and references from and to the novel. And make sure that you have the odd quotation as well. You don't have to learn reams and reams of quotations, but you should have a few well-chosen ones. You'll see how I've used quotations there to illustrate all of the characteristics, all of the points that I was making about Kasienka herself. Okay, so that's basically focusing on a character question. And for the final class then tomorrow, I'm going to focus on the theme of discrimination and then the final part of the novel itself. So the ending of the novel, or the epilogue as such. Until then, take care.